Yeah, the other day I went to this seminar workshop kind of thing. It cost like $50. I didn't pay. A friend paid for me. He thought I should go to it. Yeah, well, they called it this thing a leadership event. It was all about being a leader. There was a lot of cheering involved and handshakes. They taught you, well, they called it a leader handshake. That was a little awkward for me. And then the main guy, the speaker, he got up. He was very energetic. And he said, "Everybody's a leader. I'm here to help you discover your inner leader matrix." That's what he said. Well, not quite so sheepishly. He was very enthusiastic. Yeah, well, I mean, it was good and everything about everybody being a leader, but I kept thinking, if everybody's a leader, then who's left to be a follower? I mean, I'm not all that bright, but to me, the math of that doesn't seem to work so good. Maybe what's needed is not more leaders, but better followers. That's what I want to be, a better follower. Because sometimes I'm really bad, bad at it. I tend to get distracted and wander off. I follow my nose and, well, I wind up where I shouldn't be. But then I hear it, the voice. I know the voice. I've learned to trust it. He's never led me wrong. In fact, he always leads me right into the good stuff. And all he asks, the voice, is that I just follow him. I can do that, even without a seminar. Yeah, I can do that.
I want to welcome you to New Hope in 2018. It seems like 2018 is a little colder than 2017, at least thus far, but I think we're going to work on that and build from there. Hey, just real quick, on behalf of myself and Pastor Jeremy, I just want to say thanks to Roy and everyone else who led and stepped up last week. Very rarely are we both gone on the same weekend, but it literally had been months since I hadn't preached, and it was just even though I was sick the whole week we were gone, it was, my kids had an amazing time, which was the whole purpose, and Bethany and I returned with our kids. We didn't sell them on the black market during our vacation, so it was good. But we're back this week, and I have to ask, is anyone in the room today legitimately excited about this year? Yeah, there's some people, right? We're excited. I heard this quote a couple months ago that, to be completely honest, has been haunting me a little bit. Listen to these words. Michael Hyatt says, have you truly lived the past 10 years, or have you just lived the same year over and over again 10 times? Now, for some of you, we may be like, well, I had a pretty good year, so the idea of living that year over again isn't such a bad thing, right? Or if you had a bad year, you don't want to repeat that. But really, for all of us, I really hope and pray that we think about how we can become better, right? How we can maximize who we are, how we can grow and really become the people that we want to be, better versions of ourselves, and how we can really live into becoming the people that God has created us to be, as opposed to just getting comfortable, right, with our routine and just kind of living the same things, the same patterns, the same way year in and year out, over and over again until we die. So this series, I think, is going to help us in the process, but it's going to help us not in some, here's the 5 steps, or here's sort of the self-help, kind of a thing. This is going to help us, I believe, more spiritually. It's going to help us to get a proper focus and a better start to our year. Throughout this series, in particular next week, I also want to share more personally just some things that tie to the theme of this series that I hope will be an encouragement and a challenge and a blessing. And of course, as we always try to do, there's going to be some practical handholds, I believe, every single week that will give us opportunities to grow and to take steps. And really the whole idea is that we would become not just better people or better leaders, but better followers of Jesus. That's the whole point. And so the concept, the idea, the title of this series is called The Yoke. And I want you to see the graphic. I love this idea of there's sort of a path through this field, right? We're all trying to follow the path. And we have this picture of a yoke. And I actually have a yoke here hanging above me, right? So I have this yoke up here. And I don't know, it was interesting, even this morning, my son Christopher, when he came in the room, he said, "Hey, Dad, what's that?" And I said, "Well, you're going to have to wait and see." And kind of knowing what the series was, he goes, "Is that a yoke?" Because, I mean, if you didn't grow up on a farm, you probably have no idea what one of those things are, right? And so this is a yoke, and what happens is there's this big beam here, and you would put that on the necks of two animals, and then there are these kind of U pieces, and on the top there's a collar and a pin, and the pin would come out and the collar and these U pieces drop, and so a yoke would go on the top of at least two animals, right? And then the U would kind of go around the neck, and the collar would go on, and the pin goes in, and then there's the piece here that connects back to whatever the load is, whatever these two or many animals can be, two and two. You can yoke a whole bunch of animals together. Whatever the load is they're pulling. And then there's another person. There's a farmer or some leader who kind of helps lead, guide, direct, and encourage. When a Jewish rabbi would pick his followers or pick his disciples, those followers, usually very young boys, would take on the yoke of their rabbi. And over these next number of weeks, we're going to talk a lot about exactly what that meant, exactly what that looked like. Jesus himself, kind of being a Jewish rabbi, he talked about this idea of the yoke as well. And he tells us what his yoke looks like. And we're actually going to see that today. We're going to look at that today. So Jesus uses this exact same term. And so he uses this physical thing to really describe or to teach us about something else. And so, in this day and age, everyone would have known what a yoke was. And so he uses this idea of the yoke to teach about something else. And so I just want you to know, and just in case you were concerned at all, nobody today or over the next few weeks is going to be yoked. Okay? Some of you may be disappointed by that, but most of us are excited. So if this is a physical thing that helps us to learn about something else, what are we learning? Well, what is this really all about? And there's a few things that we need to think about. One, this is all about being linked. Okay, it's all about being linked. It's the idea that you and I are better together. It's the idea that you and I need each other. It's the concept that actually God has wired us to be and to live and even succeed in life together. And if we refuse to be linked, to be joined, to do life more closely together, we're not going to achieve or be as successful as God wants. So this is about being linked. Next, this is about being led. Do you know who the best teachers are? It's those who are teachable, right? You're not going to be a good teacher for very long if you're not a teachable person. How about, you know who the best salespeople are? It's people who totally get into the process and they can be sold, right? Like they are susceptible to the thing they want to be good at. Do you know who the best leaders are? It's those who are led, those who follow, right? And so the truth is, if you and I don't follow someone or something well, then very few people will ever follow us for very long. So this idea of the yoke is about being linked, right? That makes sense. There's got to be at least two. It's about being led, right? There's a leader in this process. And it's all about, and this is the thing I think most of us, especially as we start a brand new year, really want to talk about. This is about being multiplied. If I told you, if I had an offer for you and said, hey, you know what? I have a way for you to live that this next year you can be twice as efficient and effective as this last year, every single person here would sign up for that, right? Like, I don't care how bad your year was, if you could double your efficiency and effectiveness, you would take that deal, wouldn't you? But what if we could increase tenfold? What if we could have a year 10 times better than last year? I mean, it's crazy to think about this. Now, some of you are like, Rob, I've already beaten you to the punch. I got all my resolutions written down. Well, I don't really call them resolutions. I call them goals, even though they're resolutions. And guess what? This year, I am committed. Like, way more than all those other years where, I said I was committed and then it didn't take very long and it kind of petered out. So if that's you, right, you've beaten me to the punch, you've already figured out how to multiply and maximize your life this year, let me just give you some not so encouraging stats about goals and resolutions, okay? So statistically, when people make resolutions in the new year, 25% of them, a quarter, don't make it past the first week. So that means everybody in here who has made a resolution this year, at least 1 in 4 of us, right, is already out. And we're only 1 week into the year, right? And you're like, no, I still got the rest of today. It's like tomorrow, and Some of you are like, well, that's not fair, Rob, because I've made those, but I really haven't started yet. And you know what? Maybe you have great intentions, but are never really going to start, So 25% don't get past the first week. A third, right, so 33% don't make it past 3 months. And here's the best stat of all. Only 8% of Americans actually follow through and achieve in any way, shape, or form their resolutions. 8%. So 92% of us don't ever really do those things. Now, whether it's in the wake of failures in our past, right? We've tried and we've tried and we've tried, or the fact that we've been taught in some ways not to rely on others, right? To rely on us. Many of us, I think, sometimes see this idea of the yoke more like this image. Check this image out. It's a picture from us at Disney a couple weeks ago, right? The stocks, which represent torture and imprisonment. And here's what I want you to know. If you'll give the idea of the yoke a chance, if you will approach today in these next few weeks with an open mind, I promise you power, not punishment. You will not feel trapped by this, and it may not be easy, but you won't regret if you live the way that we're going to talk about and the scriptures are going to teach us today and this month. You won't regret it because really it's the best way to live. And so if the yoke is about being linked and led and even multiplied, how do we really achieve that, Rob? I mean, how do we get linked? Who do we get linked to? Who leads us? How do we really multiply? And not just some of us, right? Like at the end of the year, we're like, well, hey, 63% of us made it and the rest were kind of left behind. I mean, how do we all get there? How can we take this journey? And that leads us to a question, which is the title of what I want to talk around today, which very simply is, which rabbi is right for you? Which one? This initial week is, I think, a great stepping stone from last month, from this Christmas series we did called Game of Thrones, where we talked about how, all of us have things that can and do sit on the thrones of our lives, right, that lead us. And here's the truth. You and I get to pick, right? We get to pick what sits on the throne of our life. We get to pick what or who leads us. We get to choose, who and what we are linked to. And I want you to hear this. Those things, more than anything else, will determine what and if we multiply. Right? If you really want to see a multiplied life, a better life, who you're linked to and who you allow to lead in your life is going to have the greatest impact. Now, Christmas Eve, the last week of the last series, I told you guys the greatest risk all of us have, right? Isn't all those other possible things that could lead us or sit on the throne of our heart? The greatest risk all of us face is that we would sit on the throne of our heart, right? That we would lead, that we would be our own rabbi. And so I think this sort of speaks to a couple lies. A couple lies that at some point or another, I know I've believed these things. I suspect maybe all of us have believed these lies. And so right out of the gate, I just want to expose these two lies so we can kind of deal with them. Because here's the thing. If your plan for 2018 to be your best year ever is centered completely around you, you are in trouble right out of the gate. If my plan looks like that, I'm in trouble as well. So lie number one that we tend to believe at some point in life is this, that you and I are best able to lead our lives. And here's how the logic goes, right? Like, after all, who knows me better than me? And in my life, God kind of, he's busy and he's off doing things, and so is everybody else. But, man, I got, boots on the ground in my own life. I'm here all the time, right? So who knows how to do my life better than me? Who could ever figure things out for me better than I can? Except for the fact that all of us have a history with ourselves. And a lot of that history has a whole bunch of different sort of mistakes and failures and messes, right? No, you guys all good? Everybody's good, right? You've just done it perfect the whole time? No, right? We know what this is about, don't we? We've messed things up. And here's the thing. The Bible tells us that God himself knit us together when we were still in our mother's womb. The scriptures speak to the truth that God knows us personally and intimately. One of the gospel writers said it this way, that he even knows the number of the hairs on our head. And I'm wondering today if we really believe, if you believe that God knows you better than you know yourself. I wonder if you and I actually believe in a practical, live-it-out way that God cares for us and he loves us and he wants to participate in our lives in a way that helps make things the best they could possibly be. So that was lie number one, that you and I are best able to lead our lives. Here's the second lie that I just want to expose again here right out of the gate. Lie two, if I fully live life God's way, it's going to be a lot harder, right? If I do it my way, at least, and the thinking goes something like this, right? God says some things about maybe how he wants me to use my time and my money, and he has some thoughts maybe about some of the things I really like to do or I don't want to get rid of that I don't really like, because I like having ultimate control of my time and my money, and there's some things where, I want to live for God, I really, really do, but I just don't want to get carried away, right? Come on, we live in a world like that, right? I love you, Jesus, I want to live for you, but, and I want us just to, for a second, think of the repercussions of that way of life. Yesterday, I was watching an excerpt of a message from one of my favorite communicators, one of my favorite teachers, Matt Chandler, the pastor of the Village Church in Texas. And he was talking about how we as parents interact with our kids, and especially as they grow, and how that kind of connects with church. And he said this is very interesting. The student pastor at his church said, forever we have thought it's when our kids grow up and get to the age where they go off to college, that's where they lose their faith, that's where they sort of develop a secular mindset, right, that sort of pushes God out. And what all the research is now showing is it's not when our kids go off to college that they lose their faith. It's in their homes as they're growing up, where their well-meaning parents kind of allow worship with the people of God to become optional. It's when we go, well, I don't really want to force them. That doesn't do anybody any good if I make them. And they were really, really tired. You know how hard it is to get kids out of bed, right? But in what other area of life would we do that? Right? Like if they woke up tomorrow morning and were like, I'm just really tired. And my teachers, I don't even understand them anyway. It's like they're speaking a whole other language. And we only get like 45 minutes through the whole day for breaks and lunch, and it's just no fun. So I'm not going to go today, okay, Mom? Okay, Dad? We would never do that in any other area of life, right? But we do at church. And I'm not saying this to sort of, shake my finger at anybody, because here's the thing. I am for you, and I understand, right? I understand the struggle. And a lot of the things our kids love and want to be a part of instead of being here, you know what? They're good gifts, right? If your kid's in sports, if your kid's in, some kind of other thing, those can be really good gifts. They just make really bad gods. And it's my job with kids as dad. You know what? Christopher doesn't get to choose what he eats all the time, because he would make really bad decisions. Because he's 12, right? And so, I just love this idea. We think, well, we kind of rationalize everything. And when we follow out what it's like when we as adults decide, well, I really love Jesus and want to live for him, but I don't want to get too carried away. Some of the brokenness that happens down the line of that thinking. So, I won't speak for you, but as I look at my many failed attempts to run and manage my own life, they've looked more like this. I'll show you one more picture here. It's of the boys in the stocks instead of, when I try to run my life, when I try to manage my life, it's really marked by living in bondage, and it's marked by mistakes and having to pay for, a lot of times, over a much longer window of time, for my own broken, sinful choices. So as you think about which rabbi you're going to allow to lead you in 2018, I want to push aside some of these lies that we all believe, and I want you to see what the yoke of Jesus is actually like, biblically. I don't, because again, we have all these, it's way harder, Rob. My way, even if it's messed up sometimes, it's got to be easier. We sort of believe this lie. But I want us to see biblically what Jesus' yoke is actually like, because here's what I think. I think that following him and allowing him to lead, and us doing this better, us being better followers, will have the greatest impact on our lives, on our families, on our church, on our community, even on our world, than anything else we could possibly decide. And so, God, I just want to pray as we spend a few more minutes this morning just looking exactly at what your yoke is like. God, I pray that you would help us to see clearly. And if I'm trying to make something up or sell something or pitch something or hype something, I just ask right now that would just sort of fall to the ground to be blown away. But God, if these things that I'm sharing this morning have truth to them, help us to see that clearly and help us to decide. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So 3 verses that show us what following him is really all about. They come from Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30. And so here's the first verse. Jesus says this, "Come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And the truth here, very simply, is if you are weary or burdened, Jesus will give you rest, right? This is you're like, that wasn't very tricky. It's not tricky at all. So you can come to him and you will get rest. If you like enter a brand new year and you're like, I'm not ready for a new year, I'm still tired from the last year, right? You can come to Jesus and he will give you rest. He's happy. We see this throughout the scriptures. We see this throughout history. God is happy to meet people right where they are, right? We don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops and figure a whole bunch of things out. God's happy to meet us in this way. See, this is not Jesus saying, hey, stick my yoke on, and I promise you there will be adequate breaks and plenty of vacation time. He's not doing this at all. This is before you ever even put the yoke on. He's just saying, look, if you are tired, the first verse here is in the context of the yoke, but this is before the yoke has gone on. You can come to Jesus, and the first thing he wants you to do is rest. No job offers this, right? You don't start a job with a whole bunch of vacation, right? Hey, I'm starting this job. Can I get next week off? It doesn't work like that, right? But this is Jesus. It's the countercultural way of the rabbi that we call Jesus. Now here's what we think. Okay, so I get all rested up, right? But then, like we talked about, then things are going to get hard, aren't they? He just wants me to rest up so he can really, work me, right? So we can kind of when we get to the yoke, things get hard. Well, watch this. Here's the next verse. Jesus says, take my yoke. See, we've rested up, right? Then take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. So there's a bunch of stuff here. First of all, I love this idea where he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Now I'm going to use sort of the metaphor that we would think of for animals, right, who needed leadership, but think about the metaphor and just apply it to your life. If you're always walking into ditches, getting lost, or failing, we need to learn a new way. Does that make sense? Like, you want to stop walking into ditches. You want to stop getting lost. You want to stop failing. I don't care what area of life, right? It could be with your money. It could be with your marriage. It could be with your kids. It could be with your job. Whatever area of life. See, and so we need to learn a new way, but here's the problem. If you've always done something the wrong, broken way, guess what? Muscle memory is going to keep you doing something the wrong, broken way unless you are linked together with other people who are doing things or trying to do things a better way and are led by someone who knows the better way, right? We need these things. Now, this is where the other shoe drops, right? Like, I go, okay, Rob, this sounds good. I'll stick my head in the yoke, right? Jesus is there. I'm sticking my head in. I'm going to get yoked together. So I fully buy in, and that's when the yoke tightens, right? That's when the rope is jerked, and that's when I am whipped into submission. Well, here's truth number 2, and again, it's very clear from the passage. Learning the yoke of Jesus is marked by gentleness and humility. Listen to that second verse one more time. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Do you see that? We started with rest. See, we got to rest up before we even got the yoke on. But then Jesus tells us that when we put his yoke on, having the yoke on results in rest. How can that be? How can you do work? How can you have a yoke on your shoulders, around your neck, around your head, and that end up in rest for you. It's because Jesus is the kind of rabbi who is gentle and humble, right? So we all know animals or people, you don't have to put your hand up if you don't want to, who seem to need a whipping sometimes in order to change. Do we all know? Yeah, look at that. Oh, I'm going to pray for some people in here. And so check out this picture. Here's a couple animals yoked together. And I did, like sort of that, like I got the whip up and I am just ready to make this animal submit. Anybody else, like in your frustration sometimes, you can kind of snap, or, whether it's verbally or, anybody else, right? There are times my 12-year-old son would tell you this, where in my frustration, in our frustration, we yell at our kids. Yeah, I know. You would never believe that about us, would you? My 12-year-old, out of frustration, when it comes to his dog, who he loves, sometimes can act a little bit like this, right? But here's what I want you to hear, church. Jesus never does it that way. Jesus never hits a moment of frustration and just decides to yell at us or take it out on us and motivate us that way. Because the yoke, the way of Jesus, is marked by gentleness and humility. I think that's incredible. Now, that's not to say there aren't times where we're in imminent danger and he comes and snatches us up, right? Or gets us out of the way and we're like, hey, that was pretty harsh. It's like, yeah, you would have died otherwise. That's not about, harshness. That's about preservation. And so we have one more part. And really, this is the best part because it gives us the clearest picture of what the yoke of Jesus is really like. And it's very simple. It says this. Jesus tells us, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Doesn't that sound good? And so here's the truth. This is going to, again, sound revelational, right? Because truth number 3, the yoke of Jesus is easy and his burden is light. And so let me ask you a question. If you had to wear an actual physical yoke, would you rather wear this yoke right here or the one in this picture? Which one are you picking? This one? It's right? This yoke is a little bit easier, right? Now, apart from it being the right size and actually fitting us, a yoke does not need to be any heavier than necessary, right? It's not necessary to have it be 100 pounds heavier just because. And in fact, Jesus' yoke is not only light, but this is one of the reasons that Jewish people, especially the leaders, were always trying to kill Jesus, because he was always trying to take all their cumbersome, unlivable rules and pare all of them down to their essence, right? Here, instead of these 86 things, here's like the 3 things you ought to do. Here's what they're all about anyway, right? And they hated that. He tried to humanize all their rules. Now, we also live in a world, don't we, where we want to get the most out of people and relationships for the least amount possible. Like when you go to a job, they're not trying to pay you the most amount of money for the least amount of work. It flip-flops, right? They want to pay you the least amount of money for the most work you will do. And so sometimes we think, well, in the same way, the burden of Jesus must, at least at times, be really heavy, right? Incredibly heavy. We sort of think sometimes the burden of Jesus must be like this. Look at this picture. No, it's not. Here's the thing. You and I will pile on to ourselves. You and I will work ourselves to death. We will kill ourselves. But Jesus does not do this. His burden is light. Now, sometimes how we try to live for Jesus makes the burden heavier. One of the biblical ideas I've learned slowly but over many years that's been really helpful for me is this biblical concept that to obey is better than sacrifice. To be consistent and faithful is better than to not do enough and try to catch up in the end. So as we come to the end of this first week, some of you may be thinking, Rob, you said some things I really didn't know, right? Or maybe, you're like, I've never really thought about it that way, right? That what Jesus has, what Jesus offers, is different, is better, is easier than my own way. Some of you actually may be thinking about actually putting some practical kind of energy toward this, and so here's what maybe some of you are even considering in this moment. You know what? I'm going to let Jesus lead me. I'm going to sub Jesus in more in 2018 than I did in 2017. I mean, it's got to be a good step, right? It's got to be better. And I just want you to know it doesn't work that way. If you only let Jesus lead in the areas where you are comfortable for him to lead, you are still ultimately just following yourself. And so the Bible clarifies the issue with this temptation in Matthew 6:24. Look at these words. Jesus tells us, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. The context here, he's talking about you can't serve both God and money, but it really doesn't matter. Any two masters, it's kind of the same thing, right? We go, Jesus, I just love how you make me feel here. Man, I love how you help me there. But I just don't know that I'm ready to trust you with this, and I don't even know that I could trust you with that. And if that's how we think, if that's how we want to engage this, I want you to hear this. This is the same half-hearted, lukewarm stuff that sounds good, but really gets us nowhere. It will seem like, it will feel like you actually took a step, but you'll wind up with the same disappointing year again and again and again. See, look at the yoke. I want you to look at the yoke. Just for those of you here, look at that yoke. I want you to hear this. Jesus is in. He's all in. He loves you, and he loves me, and his offer for all of us right now is that he will lead us on the best path with gentleness and humility. So with that in mind, I want to ask you the question one last time. Which rabbi is right for you? You get to pick. And I just want you to know, I will love you, whoever or whatever you pick. This is not like a high pressure, but this choice will have a greater impact on your year than anything else ever could. I just want you to make a clear decision and follow through. Let's bow our heads, close our eyes, just for a minute. I want to pray for us today, but like I just said, you get to pick. I get to pick. We get to pick who leads us. We get to pick who our rabbi, our teacher, our leader is. And we can pick a lot of things that kind of sound interesting or progressive or cool that really just point back to we follow ourselves. And maybe for you, you're here today and you're like, you know what, I had a pretty good year. I've had a pretty good number of years, and so following me isn't all bad. And I get that. That may be true. But I just want to ask some questions today. Do you want this next year to be the same as last year or the year before? Or do you want some things to be different? I don't know all the things going on in your life this week, this month, this past year. But what I know is that when we tend to try to control our lives, it results in chaos. And God is a God of order and peace. And so what do you want to mark this next year? Do you want sort of your chaos to sort of be strewn through the year? Or do you want the order and the peace of God? Ultimately, the question is this. Which rabbi is right for you? Are you going to pick yourself, or are you going to pick Jesus? And again, I just want, for all of us, let's make a decision. Let's be committed to it. Let's not sort of pretend, well, we'll kind of team do it this year. No, it doesn't work that way. And so if you're in the room today, before we sing our closing song, and you just say, hey, Rob, you know what? I want Jesus to lead me. Maybe this is just an affirmation of a decision you've already made and you just want to say it again. Maybe, you're like, we've kind of sort of both done it a little bit, and I've taken control and I've let him control, and we've kind of gone back and forth, and you're like, no, this is the year where I let Jesus lead me. If that's you and you just say, I'm reaffirming, or I'm choosing today to take on the yoke of the rabbi named Jesus, whose yoke is easy and whose burden is light. And Rob, I want you to pray for me in that. If that's you today, would you just stick your hand up? I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to let him lead me. My hand's up too. That's the decision that we all have to make, not just once at the beginning of the year, but every single day. Amen. Anybody else? See hands everywhere. Yeah? Yeah. And so, Father, today, I thank you. I thank you for the start of a brand new year that is filled with possibility and potential. And God, I thank you for this truth, this reality, that there's nothing greater we can do than to decide to allow Jesus to lead us. And I thank you that when Jesus leads, he leads us with gentleness and humility. And so, God, today, I just pray, if we're truly making this decision, if we're truly leaning in, that you would fill our lives with your order and your peace. God, your peace that passes all understanding. God, may we experience this and celebrate this as we sing this final song together. In Jesus' name, amen.